Organissima, New York. Your exotic skin, hair, and beauty source, and your one-stop shop for all your natural and organic skin and hair care, featuring authentic organic Moroccan oil and prickly pear seed oil and much more. Bringing you only the best, straight from the source and proudly produced in the USA. So what are you waiting for? Shop today. Organissima, New York. Your beauty is our duty.
What's up, party people? This is Kwame, and you are rocking with Chatters That Matter right here. Keep it locked. All right, peace.
This is Rick Aaron, and you're watching Chatters That Matter with Dr. Cheryl Bryant Bruce and Hurricane. Keep it locked.
Greetings, everybody. You know me, Dr. Cheryl Bryant Bruce, MD, the Celebrity Doc, and we are here with Chatters That Matters. Let's talk about it. I'm here with my show host, my co-host, Hurricane H, Keisha Melamati.
Hello.
And we are excited to have you here again. This show is your show. We're here to educate, inform, and entertain you. So come on board for the ride. We have a great show today. This is the tail end of Autism Awareness Month. And so we wanted to wrap this up with a nice panel of very interesting, well-educated, well-informed folks that are here to bring you more information about autism. Now, this is a conversation, and we want you to be a part of it. So you can join us in our chat rooms asking questions, and our guest will be happy to answer those for you. And we want you to be a part of the show. So without further ado, I am going to start by introducing our first guest, good Dr. Anshu Batra. And Dr. Batra has had the honor of previously being on the Oprah show. So I'm feeling very honored to have you on my show following Oprah. It doesn't get bigger than that. Dr. Batra, welcome.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the audience to take an interest in this subject that's very near and dear to my heart.
Absolutely. We also have with us another doctor, Dr. Lamar Hardwick. Dr. Batra is a medical doctor, and Dr. Lamar Hardwick is a doctor of divinity. Dr. Hardwick is known as the Autism Pastor. Welcome, Dr. Hardwick.
Thank you for having me.
And then we also have the good Dr. Lorraine Jones, who is a PhD. And Dr. Lorraine will be talking to us about the interactive metronome and explaining to us how that is used for children and even adults with autism. And we'll talk about what all of that means. So, Dr. Lorraine, also welcome to Chatters That Matter.
Thank you so much. I am happy to and excited to be here to share some wonderful information and be part of this incredible opportunity.
Okay, perfect. So let's just jump right in. I would like to know how each of you got into the field of working with autism. And while you're telling us, I want to know if each of you has had a direct involvement, as in a family member, or if you yourself may have been on the autism spectrum. I caveat that with saying, as I've said all month long, that I don't think that there's a person on the planet who isn't on the spectrum. It is a spectrum. So talk to us about how that has impacted you. Let's start with Dr. Batra.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, Cheryl, I'm Anshu Batra. I'm a developmental pediatrician in West Los Angeles. And I started my journey into autism actually through initially it really was as a pediatrician. I grew up in Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan. I always knew I wanted to be a pediatrician, went to med school there, and found my life partner there. And we made our way to Chapel Hill, North Carolina to do our training, mine in pediatrics and his in critical care medicine. And I had always thought that I was going to be, I'd always wanted to be a small town pediatrician. I like growing my roots and being part of communities and being part of families. I mean, that's the heart and soul of being a pediatrician, is being you know, an integral part of families and children and communities. And,
Right.
And I just that I thought that's what I would be doing. And then as life has it, you know, God laughs when you make plans.
Doesn't he though?
He 100%. So I had my first two kids. I have three boys. My first two kids in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and then my husband got recruited to UCLA in Los Angeles. So we came here kicking and screaming because I wanted to stay in a small town. LA was not a small town at that time. But soon after we moved here, we started recognizing that my second son was not developing appropriately. And we got him evaluated. And I have to tell you, I thought I was blindsided. He was diagnosed with autism. And I'm a pediatrician. And
Okay.
And I think that it really
what was it exactly that you were seeing at that time that triggered you to feel like he wasn't developing correctly?
Right. He wasn't talking. He wasn't relating. He wasn't making eye contact. He would be like he would look right straight through me. He would not interact much. He would play very repetitively with things, not very, you know, again, I had an older son and, you know, 2-3 years older than him. And so it was, and being a pediatrician, I knew it was atypical, but I was not expecting autism. At that time, you know, it was, I think, the information about autism was not as readily available. And he was diagnosed with autism. I think that is what catapulted me into into the journey of autism. And I think that what it did was it just changed the whole course of how I practice medicine, how I think. And I, you know, basically with the help of folks in Los Angeles, was able to find some help and go through a journey of therapies. And I think through that journey, it really made me realize how fortunate, how blessed we were as a family to have people who were guided us. And I think the 2 little letters behind our name helped. Doors. And I just knew how hard it was. And so I changed my whole practice focus. I went back to school. I got certified in developmental pediatrics. And now I serve as a developmental and behavioral pediatrician and serve families to help diagnose, evaluate, diagnose, manage children with special needs, including autism, and help the families, you know, navigate and advocate for them.
Can you imagine how difficult that must be for those families who have one of these children come crashing into their world and they don't have those 2 little letters behind their names, both in terms of understanding, but also in terms of negotiating the system, how difficult that has to be. Dr. Hardwick, can you speak to that? Now, you've got initials behind your name as well, but they're not actually in the medical field. So what was your journey like, and how did you get into the field?
Yeah, so the short answer is I was a late diagnosed adult on the spectrum. I was 36 when I was diagnosed. I'll be 45 here in about a month. And so, that sort of started the trajectory of me. I'm a pastor, an author. And so, being someone in the faith community started the trajectory of me exploring why our faith communities tend to not be a central hub of support for families impacted by autism and other disabilities. And so, I was late diagnosed, but I tell people that I knew probably around the age of 7 or 8 that there were significant differences between me and my peers. I didn't understand things. I pretended to understand a lot of things. My mom records. Of course, this was after I was diagnosed. We were doing some history with my therapist that diagnosed me. She mentioned that when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, a teacher told her that, your son is very smart, but there's something wrong with him and I can't figure it out. And so I knew, I just didn't have the language to explain why I didn't understand things. I didn't understand why people did certain things. And come to find out, it was just the inability to read nonverbal language like body language, social cues, facial expressions, all those types of things. The last thing I'll say is it was a challenge, even though it's verbal, but we've all heard the saying that 90% of all communication is nonverbal. If you're someone like me who doesn't have that translator, you can imagine how much you miss.
Yes.
And how difficult it is to navigate a world where people are, quote unquote, saying things that they're not actually saying, and they're expecting you to understand what's going on. So 36 years old, I was diagnosed, and I've just done a lot of work in churches and faith communities trying to make them more accessible for people with autism and other disabilities.
Now, let me ask you a question. As someone who was fairly impacted on the spectrum, people have a misunderstanding of what autism is. And some people are under the mistaken impression that people with autism don't have feelings because they may be blunt and they may be even corrosive in the way they interact. They seem like they are insensitive. But my experience with people with autism is that that's absolutely not correct. And that not only do they have feelings, they have intense feelings. And one of those intense feelings can be isolation. Can you tell us what you were feeling as you were going through that? That's a big question. It requires a little bit of context. At the time, I was doing my doctorate, and as a part of one of the classes, we had to ask 7 people who knew us or worked closely with us to do an evaluation. And a gentleman that I work with at a church, who I respected, wrote an evaluation of me that literally read like diagnostic criteria. He said, Lamar has a hard time picking up on social cues. Lamar gets laser focused on one task at a time. And to be honest, I had never heard the term social cues before. So like most people, when you don't know something, you Google it. Right. And so I started to learn what that was and started to understand this is what people have been saying about me my entire life. That I look mean. I don't have facial expressions. I sound like a robot, all things that kids would say. But at the time, I was actually transitioning from being the pastor to youth and young adults to being the lead pastor at the church I was in. And that was a very difficult period of time because I went from working with teenagers, and I tell people, nobody really thought anything about it because all teenagers are socially awkward. So I just kind of fit in with the teenagers. But the more I had to spend time speaking in the adult service and interacting with adults, it was just really hard. It was really hard. They said a lot of things about me that I know I would never, like he walked past me, he didn't speak, he's unapproachable, he looks angry. People didn't want me to be the next pastor, especially in the South. I'm in Atlanta, in the South, where the Bible Belt, and people Yes.
expect you to be extroverted and those types of things. And
Yes.
and I had a really hard time, and that's really what drove me to get some help, because people were saying things that I was doing that I know I would never do on purpose.
Right.
And so, as you talk about the feelings, it was very hurtful, because I knew I would never treat people that way on purpose. So I realized there's something I'm missing, and I had to ask myself this question. And that question was, what do people experience when they experience me?
Right.
And that's what sort of led me to understanding how people felt about how I behaved.
Mm-hmm.
And it led me to getting a diagnosis. But it was a very, very tough, lonely. I grieved a lot, because it was like meeting myself for the first time.
Right.
Not the person I thought I was presenting, but there's this totally different person that everybody's experiencing that I didn't think that was happening. So it was emotionally very, very tough.
And that's interesting, because I actually, I haven't recently given it, but I used to fairly frequently give a talk called Mask, and talked about the mask that people wear, and how the way we perceive ourselves as presenting and the way that somebody else sees us, it may be two different things, and that the mask that we are showing them may not be the one that we actually want them to see. And even as we look in the mirror at ourselves, we're looking at ourselves through a mask of our own self-perception, and that may not be what the world is connecting with. And when the two are not in congruence, then we get things coming back at us that we don't anticipate. We think that people should be responding to us one way, they're responding to us another way. And it creates incredible stress, and can create, that stress causes inflammation and can even create disease. So we see diseases, both physical and mental and emotional, cropping up with that kind of discongruence. So it is very interesting that you explain it that way. And that is something that everybody goes through. We're born putting on a mask. I mean, the average baby comes into the world, puts on the cute little googly, cuddly mask that connects with the parent strongly and makes the parent want to be a part of that child. Sometimes with children who don't do that as well, there can be a disconnect, and the parents can have a difficult time connecting. And as that child grows, they also experience what you're describing, having that disconnect where people are judging you and reading you in ways that are totally unintentional for you. And that read can actually be very, very hurtful to the person who has autism and is experiencing that incongruence. Now, Dr. Lorraine, how did you come into this field of expertise?
Doctor, you muted. There you go.
Okay. Well, actually, my first job after I graduated with my bachelor's degree was sadly in a state institution up in Michigan in 1974. And I will tear up as I think about it. It was what encouraged me, inspired me to do whatever I could with my career to help parents and communities be able to support and engage and help individuals with autism and other developmental challenges to succeed and to make it. And that's what I've done for many years. And that's my passion. And I have worked I started working at the institution, then I worked in a school district that nearby the institution, because parents sued the state of Michigan and said, no, our kids can't live in an institution, you're not providing good education. So they were bussed out, and I was hired to help develop a comprehensive curriculum to train the staff. And I'd only been there 2 years, but I was considered an expert, and developed a comprehensive curriculum to show that people who were living in institutions, children, could learn and they could be very successful. And teachers could gain the skills to teach. And it was a wonderful experience. And then when I left Michigan, I eventually moved to Massachusetts and down to Florida. And my first job in Florida was at the University of South Florida in the TEACCH program, which is training for acquisition of language in kids. And as a speech language pathologist and an educator and eventually a behavior analyst, I was thrilled. Kids were coming in, they were nonverbal. They could say a sound. And we were able to work with them, and they would go from nonverbal to speaking in sentences in a matter of months. And that was an incredible program. And it was with that program that I said, okay, I can get kids talking. I know how to get them learn how they learn, because you have to design for them. And then it was soon after I left the University of South Florida, and I went into private practice, I began working with a lot of children with autism and continued to work with. And one of the things that was challenging was there was not a lot available out there that would help with how they learned. And I happened to read something about interactive metronome. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is just what's needed. And I called the company and I said, I want, they said, oh, they were over in Orlando then. I said, the salesmen are coming over. They could come and share with you interactive metronome. And so they came over, and one of the salesmen started telling me about what the product could do. And I went on and I said, oh my goodness, if it can do this, then this is the impact it's going to have on people with autism and with other developmental challenges. And that salesman is now the CEO of the company. And he said, you helped us so much figure out what this product could do. And what it does is and here's the box that I love, I've shared with so many families, that what it does, it helps through tempo, it helps improve coordination of motor skills, visual skills, and auditory skills. I had clients before they would look, who were on the spectrum, they would listen to me or look, but it was hard to do both. And I said, oh, let's try this. And then they loved it. They said, this is wonderful. And there's a wonderful story that I have, I think, about a lady who was diagnosed with autism. And I met her mom when she was, and Ann Millen was the mom. And her daughter was born in the early 1970s. And I thought, and look what this mom has accomplished. Her daughter never went to institutions. She found a way. I said, she's the parent that I know that other parents can do, because her daughter was nonverbal and severe sensory issues and just so many challenges. And her mom found a way. And then I asked her mom to write a book called Autism, Believe in the Future, to empower parents. My whole purpose has been to empower communities, but also parents, because when I started in the field, parents can't do this. We have to put them in special learning centers. No, we don't. Parents and communities can provide what is needed. And one of the most important instruments has been interactive metronome, because with this, it is a timing. And the behavior analyst in me likes the fact that it measures everything. It counts. It tells you how well somebody's doing. And they would do interactive metronome, and it would be incredible what I would see the next week or so. Or parents would send me these notices and say, oh, look, he can do this now. And it's wonderful.
So exactly how does interactive metronome work?
Well, interactive metronome is a program that provides auditory, and with some of the games they have now, like Brain Beat, and it provides, and these programs now have visuals where if a child, they have to look and follow, and they have to clap to a tempo. And if they're too fast, you get a certain beat, or they're too slow, you get a certain sound in the respective ear. Too slow, too fast. Also, that was initially what we had, and then later they developed games so that if you clapped, then that soccer ball would go in the proper area so that you could score, it would go.
Right.
And then you could make a sandwich. That was the one that kids loved. You would clap, and something would fall on that bread, and something else would fall on that bread, and would move across the table, and you had this wonderful big sandwich at the end, and the kids loved that. So that was how it worked. And it would only have to be generally 15, 20 minutes a day. And then you would see incredible gains, like teachers would say, oh, wow, their attention is so much better. And the parents would say, oh, wow, they can do tasks around home much better. And eye contact is incredible. And the only thing I did differently was the interactive metronome. And there are other programs that I have done as well. I have a program called Smile Talk Soar, which is a way to work with young nonverbal children to get them. It's the smile part where I smile and I hold it, and eventually, and then
And I think that's really, really important and interesting, because as Dr. Hardwick was talking about, and I worked with another young man recently. Actually, he's not that young; he's in his 40s, but was very, very successful businessman. But one of the things, like Dr. Hardwick experienced, is this perception of him being mean or unapproachable. And I actually spent many hours working with him, teaching him how to smile. And, people think about smiling as just coming automatic, but it's not automatic,
Actually, in my program with young kids, what I do, because we are wired as human beings to respond to things in the environment, operant, that something occurs, and over generations and hundreds and thousands of years, we have learned that there are certain things that if somebody looks over there, you're going to see what they're looking at. They don't have to say look, typically. So what I start with is smile. And what I say is to the parents, I want you to smile, and I want you to hold it and don't move for a while. Because too often we're smiling once. So I go smile plus hold, and that's all the child sees. There's nothing else to distract. And then I come in, and you know how I test if parents have been following that? When they come in the waiting room that next week, I was like, yep, you've been working on that. I can see it. That child walks in and smiles. I had this wonderful story. Oh my gosh. There was a little kid I started with. He was active military, and he was stationed in Middle East, and I had started working with his little one, and he went from minimally verbal, nonverbal, to verbal, saying words and smiling and engaging. And the mom was so excited. And when the dad came home for a visit, he came in, and he walked in, and he just looked at me and said, oh my gosh, you've worked miracles with my son. And as I walked out of the dad sat in the waiting room, as we walked out of the therapy session, the little boy broke into a big smile, ran to his dad, hugged him, saw a kid across the room, and then took that kid and said, hey, let's play. And they played tag around the room. And dad is like, I've never seen him do that. That's amazing. I said, that's what he's learned to do. And once we learn to read somebody's smile plus whole, and then start to read some of those gestures. It's not that I teach it, it's just that I do it in a way that because we're wired to attend to that, that's how we developed, they attend and they learn from watching, like, oh, it's over there. And they'll look, oh yeah, oh, it's over there, that kind of thing.
Dr. Hardwick, how difficult was it for you to connect with that sense of smile and to attach meaning to it?
I think the biggest challenge is that we do mimic behavior, but if your neurology doesn't allow you to, I tell people we have to have a translator to translate the meaning of certain movements and facial expressions. And if you don't have that from an early age, it becomes increasingly difficult to recognize it. And so as part of my evaluation, I had to take an assessment of different facial expressions. And I think I got maybe 3 out of 30 right. And smiling was something that I was only able to consistently recognize when it was attached to laughter. Okay. So, so that makes it difficult to know, when someone's smiling, especially if it's not at the end result of a joke or something funny. Because really that was the only way that I knew, okay, I'm definitely certain that is a smile.
And I imagine that has to be difficult too, because there can be different smiles for different things, and smiles can have different meanings. I mean, I kind of liken it to speaking Chinese. I was learning to speak Mandarin, and the Chinese have a million different ways that you can say shh, depending on what the intonation is, shh, 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 and for like the first year, and I'm good with languages, but for the first year of speaking Chinese, it took me a long time to get the intonations. I mean, to just even recognize that they were there. And so I was missing context. I was missing the whole meaning. And I imagine that the smile for someone who's dealing with autism at a more advanced level is kind of that experience of having to sort out not only whether this is a smile, but what exactly does this particular one mean, and how do I connect to it? What is my response to that smile? Is it appropriate for me to smile back, or is this person actually smirking at me and I shouldn't be smiling back at them? Or is this a sardonic smile and I might need to run for my life? It just being able to read the smile.
Yeah, there's so many factors that go into being able to read body language and facial expressions and social cues. And one of the things that I share often is that sometimes I can process it, but it's too late. Like the interaction is already over, because you only have about half a second to a second, maybe two, to it's the way I explain it to parents who I've mentored their children. It's like tennis. Once that ball is hit across, you got to hit it back immediately. And so what I discovered is that there are some things that I would walk away and think, oh, that's what they meant, or oh, that's probably what that was. But that interaction and the challenge is, especially as you get older, is people have far less grace for you the older you get, because they expect you to quote unquote know how to behave. And so that interaction can be over and done with, and I might not get a second chance to make a first impression, so to speak, because people have formed their opinion about whether or not I'm socially aloof, or generally it's people just categorize me as angry or unapproachable. And so, yeah, it's far more complicated. Sometimes I think that we make it out to be. It's not simply just a smile. It's the context. It's the timing. It's, what was it attached to? Like you said, there's the voice intonation is something that I have struggled with. Sarcasm is something that I don't get because it's dependent on physical, it's like physical comedy. Their body has to be a certain way. Their head has to tilt a certain way. And in the moment, I'm not able to process that quickly enough. And so oftentimes I answer rhetorical questions because I think they're real questions. Right. And, so there's just so many things that factor into it that, and I just ask people to just give grace and slow down and let people like myself process and be clear with your communication. It's okay to say. One of the things that tipped me off is that I started to realize how many times people had to tell me when they were joking.
Right.
And so I started to realize I'm not getting something because everyone's always having to tell me, that was a joke, right? Which meant I wasn't processing something. And so, but I tell people it's okay to say that because chances are I'm probably not going to get it. So it's okay to just be clear about what your intentions were in that interaction.
Right. Now, Dr. Batra, you're a developmental pediatrician now. And we see this time and again with kids with autism and with other developmental disabilities for that matter. There are things that can be done, like the interactive metronome. And then one of the programs that I worked with when I had the Gregory Center for Exceptional Children and Families, we also worked with patterning. And patterning basically was you took the baby all the way back to the point in development where they may have arrested or not processed. And so we did things like commando crawling, and then we switched it to regular crawling to get the brain talking to each other from side to side and to open up communications. And there were lots of things done. Also had drum therapy. It was actually a dance class for children with disabilities so that they could participate in, and other kids from the community participated in the class as well. And it initially started out as just a basic dance class for the kids, but we had drummers that would come in. And very quickly, we realized that because of the rhythms of the drums and the sequences and the patterns, we could control the experiences of the children. We could bring them up, we could bring them down. With children with all sorts of different disabilities, but in particular, we did find that with children with autism that we could work around, and we had to be careful how we worked around because with autism, and depending on how intense it is, you can get overstim. And so, our drummers were very keen at watching the children and got to know the children. So they would know when to bring those drums back, to bring the child back into their calm place. And they knew when to take them up, to pull them out. And so we were able to see some children who were not verbal become verbal. We were able to see some children who were not interactive become interactive with other kids around this musical experiences of the drums, which is very, very primal. What are some of the other things that we can do with these kids developmentally, and not just with kids, but with adults? Because like Dr. Hardwick, some people do not get diagnosed until much later in life, and they're kind of stumbling and bumbling around trying to figure out, why don't I fit in? Or why can't I make this work? Why am I not? What am I missing here? So what sorts of things can people do that can enhance their experience, both from the point of view of a person with autism or the point of view of someone supporting a person with autism? And that means whether that's someone in your family or it's someone on your job.
Wow, that is a very good, great question, actually, that I think everyone asks. I don't think we have enough time to talk about all the things. To be honest, we would need days, to be honest. And
Right,
I
right.
can't even tell you how amazing it is for me to hear all three of you and your experiences of, interactions or therapies or that you've used that you found to be helpful, because like my brain is just going, because I'm thinking about in terms of like how the neural networks, what gets connected and fired, and I know development. I know how babies develop into functioning children and adults, and what you described in terms of the motor patterning, or taking the child back to wherever their development got derailed, right? And helping them kind of move along and recapitulate, right? Those patterns, whatever it is, and helping them get to, move along. That's actually one of the key things. Even though, to be honest, that's not how people are thinking, but that's actually what needs to be done.
Right.
We don't have enough evidence-based research being done in this area, which actually needs to be done to allow more and more people to do this, and third-party payers to pay for it. But so what are some things to do? So I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of we have to go back to early stages of development, knowing that the sensory motor system is really one of the key areas. That's the foundation of the brain. That's how the brain communicates initially, and then neurons, these wires in our brain that then go on to then communicate with other wires to then develop skills happen. But it really starts from that basement of the brain, which is our sensory system and our motor system that communicates. And the way it happens early on in the first year of life is through these motor patterns that happen. Right? And so there's no coincidence why children start talking after they get up off the ground and start walking. There's no coincidence. Right. In my world, we say that language is a latecomer in development. What needs to happen first is you need to have a very solid, integrated brain and body system that has gone through motor patterns for 12 months. And all of those patterns start from, actually they start from in utero, when the baby is in mommy's, in tummy, all the movement patterns that are happening, in utero, and then the baby coming out as a newborn on day of life 0, and then developing their, the head and neck strength to then be able to roll and then sit up and then crawl on all fours and then get up and creep and then start walking. All of those motor patterns are critical to allow the brain to start connecting, as you said, from both sides of the brain, to then allow then the speech and language to develop. So that needs to happen. And so what I do as a developmental and behavioral pediatrician is, I sort of look at the child from a developmental standpoint and see, where is the child developmentally compared to other children their age. And I look at really more at strengths and challenges as opposed to diagnoses. I mean, diagnoses I think are important for certain things, but they don't describe the child, and they're not who the child is.
Exactly.
And that's what I spend a lot of time telling parents and explaining to parents, that the label isn't who your child is. The label is just a way to describe behaviors and describe the development. Let's talk about what we need to do, right? And so early on, I would say majority of our kids, even though the standards of care for autism are speech and language therapy and applied behavioral analysis, early on they very often need physical therapy and occupational therapy to help, again, create those neural networks, those connections in the brain from both sides to allow then the body to then also move and develop. And so very often those therapies are important early on in terms of physical therapy, sensory integrative occupational therapy, and then speech therapy. So all those are the therapies that are important. But I tell parents early on, I said, get your child moving. Let's get your child moving. Let's have them move, make those patterns of, that you described, have them practice those movement patterns, whether it's in the living room, take all the cushions off your couch and have the child be comfortable with navigating on all fours, from the carpet to the couch, to the pillows, to the carpet again, help their brain register all those movement patterns so that they're then able to then move on to then develop the other ongoing developmental skills. And so I get my kids early on very often involved in music programs and, as you said, rhythm and music. And there's a reason you were mentioning about the rhythm and the drummer and
I saw the big smile.
I was just like my brain was on fire because what we know is that music is one of the key tools that we have that actually activates all parts of the brain. And we know that through brain research, the neurology of music. We know that not only there's a music center in our brain, but music activates all parts of our brain, from the higher sort of thinking part of our brain, as well as our subcortical or our cerebellum and midbrain, the real primitive parts of our brain. And so music is a key way to activate and engage the different parts of the brain. So I love getting music and movement involved in with these kids. And it's interesting. There's actually a therapy called neurologic music therapy, NMT. I don't know if you,
right.
A lot of people are not aware of it. I certainly wasn't until years ago when I found out more about it actually through a colleague of mine who does music therapy, and she told me about neurologic music therapy, and I'm like, what is that? And anytime, again, with autism, listen, there unfortunately is no real standards of care in terms of interventions and really what the roadmap is for treatment of autism, because there's not one autism. There's many.
I was going to say, I would think with autism, it really is, it has to be kind of individualized because we are all at a different place on the spectrum. And depending on where you're landing on that spectrum, that's going to determine.
Right. It determines. And that's actually what now medicine is sort of shifting to, is not just looking at autism as a big, as a term, but to describe individuals, but really individualizing and endophenotyping, right? So individualizing the different types of different.
So we're getting all of these letters falling out, the PDD and all. I mean, just it's like what?
There's been a big reshifting of how autism is described because of now through brain research and through a lot of research over the last couple decades. We know now that there is not one autism. There's probably a
gazillion.
A gazillion, and at least in my, as I'd like to say, 25,000 years of doing this, I can probably identify 5 or 6 different subtypes. Just in my own practice, I can tell, and based on which subtype it is, that determines then how you address it. There are some individuals that have more, as I mentioned, like more of a sensory motor sort of type, and they need more of the physical interventions. There's some that have more of a language base and they need more, maybe the language sort of intervention. There's some that have more of a medical or biomedical sort of a type, and they may need more medical sort of interventions, and there's some that are more behavioral and need more of a behavioral approach. So it's such a spectrum, which is why it is called an autism spectrum disorder. But I think that, you know, the movement piece, I think is just, it so resonates with me, because I do find that is a big part of how the brain develops and how it engages and integrates and develops the skill sets. And I do feel that is one of the core issues that I find in a lot of my individuals with autism, they struggle with, or they have deficits in.
Okay. Now there is another core issue, but I do want to ask before I jump to the next section, because this is such a huge topic that we could talk forever, and we're trying to kind of shrink the length of our shows down a little bit. So we're going to kind of encapsulate it, but I definitely am going to bring all of you back, because I just see hours and hours worth of conversation around this topic. Dr. Hardwick, with regards to music and rhythms and tonalities, how has that impacted your life, and how have you been able to use it to your advantage?
Yeah, music is a big part of my life. I think for most people, this is generalization, but for most people on the spectrum, we tend to be able to recognize patterns and to appreciate patterns and rhythms. Some of that, I think, is why neurologically we tend to lean towards repetition, right? It is most natural to us. Like I do the same things the same ways, eat the same things. I even joke that I buy the same clothes. You know, I this black shirt, I probably have 10 of them. But music is something that is also key to that, because of the natural repetition and the rhythm. Now one of the challenges,
that is kind of one of the hallmarks that we see a lot with autism. They call echolalia, where one is repeating rhythms and things. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and even if you think about things, let's listen to Dr. Batra, and even as you think about things like stemming, it is a natural way.
Define stemming for our audience.
Stemming is basically self-stimulation, and so that's when you see the child that likes to spin or flap. Those are typically the things that most people pay attention to, but self-stimulation is something that everyone does, even if you're not on the spectrum, right? So it's you know, biting your fingernails or popping your knuckles or twirling your hair or clicking the pen repeatedly, right? But it's that natural inclination towards repetition and rhythm. And so a lot of times I will share with parents, you know, unless a child is endangering themselves or endangering someone around them, let them stem. It's their natural way of trying to self-regulate their sensory challenges, right? Like I tell people, the best way I can describe it is like when you're driving down the road and you think you smell something burning, the first thing you naturally do is turn down the radio, as if you can't smell and hear at the same time. And so, right, but it's our way of trying to regulate one sense to get a hold of another, right? And that's what self-stimulation is. And so, but I say that to say that that's that rhythm and repetition and sensing that is built into music. So that's been a big thing for me. I go to sleep to music. I have my headphones. I don't sleep very well because of, you know, my brain doesn't make a lot of melatonin. So the doctor has me on. Finally, when I got 40, I asked for help because it was cool when I was 20 to be able to stay up all night. But when I hit 40, it wasn't cool anymore. So I finally relented and asked my doctor to help me. But those are things that I use to help regulate sensory overload. The challenges is being in an environment where I can't control the volume So as a pastor, like people ask me all the time, how do you deal with the loud noise when you're in church and the music? Well, one, I'm the pastor, so I know everything that's going to happen that morning. So that gives me a sense of control over. I know exactly how long the song is. I know we also at our church provide people who have sensory issues with noise canceling headphones. So sometimes I use mine, or sometimes I stay in my office if I'm sensory overloaded. But music is a large part of it. For me, I would just say that the challenge is when you're not able to control the volume, which is ironic because a lot of people on the spectrum, like we we have challenges with loud noises, but we tend to be loud people.
Right. That is interesting.
But yeah, music is a huge part, and I've actually used that for children and teenagers that I've mentored. I would ask that we had a gentleman at our church that gave piano lessons. So a lot of the parents that would come to me as I was mentoring their children, I would direct them to him as a way of helping them with a lot of the sensory things, but also giving them a sense of self-confidence is something that, because it's natural, the repetition and the rhythm, they actually tend to do very well at things like piano lessons. But it also gives them the sense of confidence that is something that they can succeed at. So it's all that works together, and it's worked for me. And it was a part of my therapy. I didn't just get diagnosed. I spent over 2 years with a therapist that diagnosed me to help me to unravel a lot of things, because I was 36. I was, full grown and married and had a career and kids. And so I had to figure out ways to try to navigate life. And so part of what I did with her also included, using music and rhythm and repetition as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. Now, Dr. Lorraine.
Yes.
I saw you over here engaging, and don't feel like you have to do that. This is a conversation. You can jump in. So
okay,
what that hand was waving. What was it that you wanted to tell us?
What is so exciting about interactive metronome is it is a easy to use, starting with young children up to I have individuals in their 50s and doing interactive metronome, and what it can do is help that visual and auditory system sync, so they can process information, and it decreases what I've seen is decrease in stress and more comfort, and the ability to process different types of information simultaneously, because the system, auditory, visual, and motor, and the motor are all in sync, and we can measure it, so we know. And then, in fact, my clients will say to me, it's going well. I have a guy who's in college, and he does interactive metronome. He's done it for years, and when he needs it, he said, I'm going to start it again, and I'll do it for a few days. But they recognize when they need it, and then it gets them back to where they are comfortable, and
puts them back on track, gets them in sync.
Really back on track, and they love it. And that's what I like, that it can go home with them. They can easily do it, and it's only 15 or 20 minutes a day. But the actual changes the change is so powerful for them, and they're like, this is amazing. It's helping me do everything. It's easier. Everything is easier. And especially a lot for the social aspect, because when you're trying to engage with people, you're going to see body movement, you're going to hear things, and process lots of information simultaneously. And they say it has helped, the interactive metronome helps that tremendously. And it's easy to do.
Perfect.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to throw one more thing out there on the table, and we're not going to dive real deep into this because, again, I'm trying to control time, because this show typically, because we have these great conversations, we've been running into 2 and 3 hour shows. So we're trying to cull that down. And, like I said, we're definitely going to bring it back. But there is one area that I would like to at least superficially delve in, and we can come back to it. at a later date, because I think that it is an area that is very important in the management of autism, and that is diet. And I remember back in the olden days when people still rode dinosaurs, there was conversation. I went to the DAN conferences, and there was always the conversation around the diet. And at that time, I was working with a Dr. Theaharides. And one of the things that we were proposing was the leaky brain, the leaky blood-brain barrier, and how diet impacted that. And we were really pretty much laughed out of the room. And now we've come full circle to embrace that diet does have huge impact on autism. So I'd like for each of you to talk a little bit about that. And again, keep it brief because we're going to keep this nice and tight. So let's start this one with the person who's experienced it. Let's go back and start this one with Dr. Hardwick. Sensory issues with foods, and have there been foods that, at least for you, have been able to help you deal with your autism?
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, there's always some of the challenges, especially if you are hypersensitive to certain things, which I tend to be with certain textures. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I have used and learned as a life hack that has helped me is crunchy foods. Tend to help me. So like, for example, if I know that I'm going out to some kind of gathering, or if I'm going somewhere with my wife and there's going to be a lot of sensory input, I tend to pack my pocket full of hard candy that I can crunch. But while I crunch, I count. And so it sort of is like a sensory hack.
That makes so much sense.
Chewing gum as well, because of the rhythm and the repetition, I can focus on that input. So it's like the metronome, right? It's being able to do two things at once. But as far as food, I'll just say keep it brief. I think hard candies, crunchy things, things like pretzels, things that I could easily pop, not necessarily because I'm hungry, but because it helps me with sensory input to manage when things get overwhelming. So I tend to pack my pockets full of hard candy, gum, mm-hmm. crunchy things. Those things tend to be very helpful.
And for the parents out there who have a child who is sensory aversive, it is a little bit counterintuitive because they respond to the loud noises and cracks and pops and things like that can drive them crazy. But as Dr. Hardwick said, if they have that crunchy thing of their own, they can put in their own sensory input to override that. So that even if your child is sensory aversive, that may be something that you may want to try. Thank you very much for that tip, Dr. Hardwick. Dr. Batra, talk to us about this sensory type of thing and how diet plays in with that. Because, people have just all out battles over a kitchen table. And my daughter was on the spectrum, and we used to go to war over certain foods. And it wasn't until spaghetti with stewed tomatoes in it was one of them. And it wasn't until she was actually an adult that she was able to tell me what that was about, because I was thinking it was just a taste thing. And one of the rules in our house was you didn't have to like a food, but you had to at least taste it, have one spoonful of that food to develop your palate. And that was one thing she could never get past. And it was always going to be a battle. And she was able to explain that later, that it wasn't a taste thing for her at all. It was a textural thing. And she still to this day can't do the stewed tomatoes.
Wow. Okay. So there's two separate things here regarding the gut that I'd like to bring up. And one is, I think, Dr. Cheryl, you were mentioning, I think initially the gut and the leaky gut sort of issues, right? Mm-hmm. And what we do know is that individuals with on the spectrum for autism tend to have a higher incidence of gastrointestinal issues, whether it's constipation, diarrhea, bloating, a variety of different sort of stomach issues, right? Mm-hmm, and we don't know why. There are some theories, and we do know that there's a subset. Again, these are all the subsets, right? Mm-hmm. Subtypes of autism. That there are a subset of individuals on the spectrum who probably are affected quite a bit by dietary issues, and specifically foods that are more inflammatory, right? That create more inflammation in the gut. And
can you just tell our audience what some of those types of foods might be?
Foods would be things like gluten and wheat and dairy, right? So those would be the big ones that I think people talk about. But the thought is that in certain individuals, they are more susceptible to having more inflammation in their gut because of the types of foods that they're consuming, and the inflammation then causes the stomach lining to then become a little bit less impermeable, right? So it opens it up to then allow bacteria and things to escape the gut and go into the blood system, and which then will eventually go into the brain system, right? And so the thought is that's what the leaky gut sort of association is thought about. Mm-hmm. And so those are the individuals. Again, it sort of depends on what the sort of subtype the patient that's presenting to me. Those would be the individuals that I would very, very quickly have them have more of a restrictive diet, maybe try, a gluten-free diet and, casein-free diet, and see if we can, and as well as maybe using probiotics, which also helps to kind of, heal and coat the stomach lining. So the focus of the intervention, focus of the food and the nutrition is really to not only heal the gut, but also provide the gut with foods that are not inflammatory, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the second piece here is really the sensory, which is what Dr. Hardwick was alluding to in terms of foods that provide a sensory input to the nervous system, mm-hmm. that then can have a calming effect or alerting effect, right? And so that's very common. And I have to tell you, with as you mentioned about your daughter, that we have two rules in pediatrics. That there's two battles that you're never going to win with children, eating and pooping. So you don't get into with children with those two things. And so with the eating, it's really tricky because very often kids with who are on the spectrum, they very often have sensory issues. They often are very picky eaters, and mealtime and feeding the child becomes such an issue. I mean, it just mm-hmm. takes over the whole peace and harmony of family. And so in terms of the sensory piece, you have to remember the tongue has loads of sensory receptors that allow us to taste and feel. Our nose plays a big role in terms of eating, in terms of smelling, right? And our touch also plays a big role. And so very often for children who may have certain sensory sensitivities, or they may be drawn towards or be calmed if they have more crunchy foods, like Dr. Hardwick was mentioning, things that, he can bite into, that then sends a message to his brain that this is okay, it's safe, and alerts him, and it helps him feel more calm and with consuming whatever the food is. And so again, that's where, depending on what the sensory profile is of the child, either hard, crunchy foods are helpful, or sometimes even just preparing the hands, because the tactile plays a big role in then how the child senses, the taste. Sometimes just having, speech pathologists will do this a lot, putting food like around the mouth first, and having the child then take the tongue and lick it so that it's not too overwhelming, right? So again, the texture and the taste really feeds into the sensory profile of the child, which then allows the eating to happen. So I don't know if that answered the question.
And to make that piece really more relatable to a lot of people who don't necessarily have those issues, a lot of us got COVID. And part of the COVID was we lost our sense of smell. And so people talked about the struggle with eating because the food just didn't taste right, and there was a disconnect, and eating disorders and all sorts of things were coming out of that. So that just kind of, most of you can kind of relate to what a big piece the sensory actually plays in your perception of food. And when we think about what a big piece food plays societally in our relating to each other, that's major. So if you can work through that component, then it does make a big difference in the lives of people on the spectrum. Dr. Lorraine, now you have the interactive metronome.
Yes.
How have you seen the interactive metronome help with some of the issues surrounding foods?
Well, I think what I've seen is that interactive metronome improves coordination, muscle coordination, and attention and focus. So that's a big part, is the improvement in the ability to attend for longer periods of time and to engage in more coordinated movement, which helps with all aspects, including feeding. And another part that I wanted to also mention, that with respect to textures, I think one of the things that is hard for over the years that so many have told me is mixed textures are very hard. So people have to, it's not that they don't like it, it's that their system can't tell which one it is. So
I'll admit to that myself, because
so I think that
I am
really
fanatical about eating one. I'm the one that eats around my plate. I do not mix textures.
Yeah, so I think that's really important to remember. But in terms of the interactive metronome, the improved focus, attention, and motor skills, the motor core, all of those can impact feeding and feeding self, and then the chewing, all of that, I think, because everything's more coordinated and they can sense movement better and anticipate and plan and execute.
Excellent.
Especially, I don't think I mentioned enough, but the attention and focus, extended period where it is easier to attend for longer periods of time comfortably. And like, oh, I sat through that whole movie. Oh, I finished that. Or, it's a surprise to them that they didn't have to work at it. It just happened.
Right.
And it's a wonderful impact of interactive metronome. So
right. Now, I want to get the lay voice in the room, and I know my co-host, he's been really, really quiet, so he has been absorbing all of this and taking it in. So I know that his head is just reeling with questions. So do you want to throw out a couple of those questions as we're kind of wrapping the show up, because I know that you always have some good ones.
I do, but they will probably require a lot of time. but so a couple of things. I mean, first of all, thank you. It's been I'm just really absorbing, and as you said, I love it and I enjoy it, and I'm the least, I guess, clinically inclined with the language and the expertise here. However, I do. I mean, from just a general public, if you want to speak it that way, right? This sensitivity issue about autism, inclusion, and tolerance, I think, because, listening to Dr. Hardwick, just the ability when someone is not identifying that you have the autism, right? Or not able to notice that you are different, you have something that is different about you, and react to you in a way that is abrasive or not as fun, right? That challenges me. And I think, I don't know if there's enough awareness to educate people, but when you're talking to someone, they might have something that is causing whatever it is, and if it is autism, it is autism. But you don't know that. For the most part, I encounter someone on a day-to-day basis, and if I don't know that they have autism, or I'm not even aware what it looks like or how it feels like and what the reaction will be, I'm probably gonna be like, "What's wrong with you?" Right? And then now I'm gonna be really bad, rude, whatever the case may be. We need to do some more work about.
Not you, Hurricane. I don't think you have a rude bone in your body.
No, I'm not talking about me. I'm just giving an example as when you have people that don't know that, when you talk, that the idea is you have to be sensitive to people regardless, right? And, understand that just because you have a perception of what a reaction or interaction should be, doesn't mean that everybody's going to be the same. And you have to be like, when you see something that may not be in your, template as the regular format, on a normal, what is normal? That's a big question, right? Understand that there might be some underlying, conditions, whatever they are.
Mm-hmm.
And in autism, it's so, I guess, spacious. It's so vague, to a degree. I mean, Dr. Hardwick, you mentioned you didn't even diagnose until 36. Now, all these years, you had to interact with people all the time. And to your point, people are going to be like, and I didn't want to ask you this question, but I'm sure there will be some rude, experiences that you've had that were not really as fun. And, probably it's a struggle, because I've had actually different shows about this. And most of the things that were in common, that people, when they were younger, they were really faced with adversity and just, challenges. Bullying is the biggest one. People are just not nice, to others. Unfortunately, we're supposed to be nicer, but that's not the case. So that was kind of like one of my biggest things that I wanted to talk about, is just that, we have hopefully the ability to share more and talk about that. And I don't know if there are organizations and educational spans. It's one thing we're talking here about how you talk and work with the people with autism, but how do we work with the other side of the people that actually interact daily, and so we need to have that balance. And I think that in itself is work that needs to be done.
You are speaking my language.
And I me too. That is exactly why. Yep.
This is not about individuals. This is about, this is about collective society, understanding and being inclusive, and understanding that they're neurodivergent individuals, people with different,
Well, so the challenge, doctor, is that not everybody, I mean, again, recently we're talking about autism, 70s, 80s, 90s. Like, people either don't talk about it, like there's nothing going on here, or they don't even know much about it. Now it's coming up. There's more awareness. There's more awareness. But and that's the other thing, like for the youth now, the children are getting the attention because there's programs and stuff.
Right.
Many did not have that. And so they grew up, to middle age, or even, basically age through the process without having to.
I have kids that I've diagnosed, and the parents they think, wow, that they realize they probably have some features as well. And and then they go through their evaluation process. Absolutely. I think the issue is also the stigma around, developmental delays, developmental issues, going back to what we were talking about, mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
think it's the whole stigma around it back in the 60s and 70s. And, I think there was a certain idea about, individuals with autism and related disorders, that they were quite impacted and lower functioning and needed to be, as Lorraine mentioned, most of them ended up being institutionalized, and the successful ones weren't, and that's how you base success.
Yes,
whether they were institutionalized or not, and I think since the rise of autism in the 90s and 2000s, I think really brought on a campaign of awareness, social awareness, and of early signs. And I think now we have a whole generation of individuals who started as young and young children with autism, now are grown up with autism. And again, it's a spectrum. So now we have to, whether we like it or not, we have to know that these are individuals that are have our goal should be, our focus should be not the label, but how do we bring out and identify and equip individuals with on the spectrum with skills that are meaningful, purposeful, inclusive. And that's really what our focus now is shifting more towards, not only I think clinically, but also from a governmental standpoint. I think we're realizing we need to.
And from a social standpoint, and I mean, I'm kind of tearing up here and just really welling up, because I started with this back in the 90s in terms of trying to bring these children out into the community, bring them out into the light, to foster communication throughout, and to see it, especially in like the last few years, where you've got all the celebrities on board talking about these things, and where we're having conversations like this out in the open, where children are being brought out to participate inclusively. It really warms my heart to see how far we've come. We have so much farther to go with understanding these things, and frankly, with just understanding each other, because we're quick to judge.
Yes.
And yet, as I said, we're all on the spectrum somewhere, and we need to just leave judge at the doorstep.
Yes.
We're not nobody died and left us boss, so we just need to leave judge at the doorstep and be inclusive, accept others who are different than we are, love the differences.
Yes. 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 I do have one comment that I think that there are so many in the community organizations and groups, YMCA, preschools, and the children there that I have seen when I've gone to inclusive preschools and YMCA, all of that, they feel so happy to engage with people who are different, and they know who are challenging, have challenges. And I think of my 3 children and how excited they were when they would work at the YMCA and work with the special needs kids, to help them in the gymnastics program. It was so powerful. It was so wonderful. And we forget that everybody gains,
Yes,
they feel good about
absolutely.
themselves and they love it. So, and communities gain. And I remember one, this was decades ago, there was a gentleman, Jeff LaFleur in Tampa, and he would train gymnasts for Olympics. And we asked him at one point, because my daughters were going, would you consider working with kids with autism? He loved it. He ran, and the only classes he would teach would be the Olympic bound and kids with autism. He loved it. And everybody in his gymnastics, in his gym, loved it. So that's where I learned that communities, they feel so good when they are successful at including everyone. So.
Absolutely. Hurricane, do you have any other questions?
Oh, I definitely do, but we'll have to table that for the next, phase of this, because we talk about the spectrum and the condition and the different things that we have today and how we're working. But the question that comes to my mind, like we talk in terms of any type of medical diagnosis, right? We talk about the roots of it, what's happening behind. Is there anything we can do to prevent things like that? What makes that diagnosis originally? Can it be prevented? Those are all questions that maybe we need to talk about. Like,
Yes.
What's before I
Yes.
guess someone is in this world? Is there anything that can be done to identify from genetically? I mean, we are able to look at cancer and diabetes and other things, from a DNA perspective and see if we have potential to give that to our progeny and whatever. And is there something that can be done there? Is there? I'm not sure. So that's the question that can be on the table for the next discussion.
Yes.
And maybe we can talk about like what can be done to educate people to do maybe work, because maybe there is a way to do something about it in advance. I don't know. And to prepare people, because if you know that it's happening, you might be well prepared, and it's a different story. So those are the things that I have in mind. But like I told you, we can start a whole hour now.
Yes. That is a whole nother conversation, a very big conversation, and a very important conversation. So definitely that is one that we will want to bring back. And I hope that our three guests will be happy to join us again in the future for that discussion. We have tremendously enjoyed having you, and there's been a lot of good information put out here on the table. So we definitely will love to have all of you back.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
So much.
Thank you.
So you have been listening to Chatters That Matters. I'm your show host, Dr. Cheryl Bryant Bruce, MD, the Celebrity Doc, here with my co-host, the wonderful, the fabulous Hisham Elamanti, Hurricane H. And we want you to come back again and again and again, participate with us, hit those like buttons, share it with your friends, tell them about the great conversations that we have. I mean, I know for us, we never leave the table without taking out tremendous amounts of information. And I think that Hurricane and I probably benefit from these conversations more than anybody else, because we leave feeling pretty smart, because we're just getting our brains absolutely loaded with good stuff. And so we love having you all. We love sharing all of this with you, our listening audience. We want you to participate. We want this to be more and more and more your show. So be sure to come back and join us again. Last but not least, if each of you can tell us how we can reach you, if people have further questions for you or want to hear more about the programs that you're working with. Let's start with Dr. Batra. Well, actually, let's start with Dr. Lorraine, since you're up front and center on the screen here, at least on mine.
Okay. Well, I can be reached at the Interactive Metronome. They can reach me there. And the email, actually, I should probably have you go to the...
Dr. Lorraine, if you can send it to us.
Yeah, that's what I want. I'm trying to think which one would be
actually,
best.
Yeah, we will actually post it to the website and post the information so that people will be able to reach you.
Yep.
And Dr. Hardwick.
Sure. Probably the best way is I have a website. It's autismpastor.com. And on that website, it'll connect you to all my social media, my YouTube, my books, the website to the church that I pastor. But if you're on Twitter, you can find me at Autism Pastor, and also on Instagram as well. But generally, if you just also Google Lamar Hardwick, there's plenty of stuff that will come up. So I'm not hard to find.
Excellent, excellent. And Dr. Batra, how do we reach you?
You can reach me on email. My email is anshubatra@gmail.com. I'm pretty good with responding to emails.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we will put all of that contact information on the site. And of course, remember that if you see one of our guests that you would like to reach out to and you don't find the information, you can always reach back to Hurricane and I, and we will make sure that you all make the connections. So again, thank you for joining us, and thank our audience for participating and joining with us in this interesting and informative experience. We hope that you've been entertained, and we hope you will come back often. We're here every week. These shows are perpetual once they've launched, and also they replay multiple times in multiple different locations. We're on pretty much all of the platforms, both the television platforms and the radio broadcasting platforms. So you can catch these shows if you missed something, if you want to hear it again. They're there for your enjoyment. Thanks, and come again. We love you. Have a great week.
Everyone.
Chatters that matters. Let's talk about it.